They called her the Blood Countess, a woman so consumed by vanity that her search for eternal youth would drench her name in legend and horror. Picture a frozen castle in the Carpathian Mountains, its corridors echoing with whispers of girls who entered but never returned. In the candlelight, her reflection shimmered on pools of red, and those who served her prayed not to be chosen next. For centuries, tales of Countess Elizabeth Bathory blurred the line between myth and truth. Was she a monster who bathed in blood, or a woman destroyed by the power that envied her? If you enjoy uncovering history's darkest truths, subscribe to Secret Historians and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. These forgotten stories now connect us across time and empires. What you're about to hear is not just a story. It's the obsession that turned a noblewoman into a legend of terror. Winter blanketed the hills of Hungary in silence. In a vast stone fortress known as Szeged Castle, a noble family prepared for the birth of a child who would one day be whispered about in every corner of Europe that her name was Elizabeth Bathory. Born in 1560, she came from two of the most powerful dynasties in Transylvania, the Bathorys and the Somages. Her bloodline was drenched in privilege, but also in something darker: madness, cruelty, and pride. From an early age, Elizabeth was taught that her family was above ordinary mortals. She grew up surrounded by servants, tutors, and the stern presence of soldiers. But even as a child, something about her felt off. She would watch animals suffer without flinching. When a servant was punished, she would stare not with pity, but with fascination. Whispers say her first lessons in cruelty came not from the castle halls, but from the women who raised her. The Bathory family was known for its occult interests. They believed blood carried power, strength, beauty, even youth itself. And Elizabeth, bright and impressionable, absorbed it all. As she grew, her beauty became her weapon. Her pale skin and sharp eyes made nobles whisper that she was both angel and demon. By 14, she was engaged to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a man known across Hungary as the Black Knight. He was a warrior feared by the Turks, brutal on the battlefield, loyal only to his name. Their marriage was not one of love, but of power. It united two mighty families, cementing their control over land and politics. At 15, Elizabeth stood in front of a mirror in her wedding gown, her reflection shimmering like a ghost in the candlelight. Some said she smiled. Others said she looked afraid of her own beauty. Szeged Castle became her new home, a fortress perched on the edge of the Carpathian wilderness. It was beautiful in daylight and terrifying by night. The wind howled through the corridors like lost souls. Servants spoke in whispers about things seen after midnight, shadows that moved on their own, footsteps when no one was there. Her husband was often away at war, leaving Elizabeth to rule the estate. She managed hundreds of servants, farms, and villages. To the outside world, she was elegant, intelligent, disciplined. But inside the walls of Szeged, fear began to grow. When a maid spilled wine, Elizabeth's temper exploded. She would strike her so hard that blood dotted the white tablecloth. Then she would stare at it, at the red spreading across the fabric, almost entranced. One story claims that a fortune-teller once told her, "Your beauty is your power. Lose it, and you lose everything." From that day, vanity became her obsession. She mixed potions, consulted alchemists, and sought remedies to preserve her youth. But no potion, no charm, could stop the march of time. Then, one winter morning, something happened that changed everything. A servant girl was brushing her hair. The brush snagged, pulling a few strands. In anger, Elizabeth struck the girl so hard that blood splattered across her skin. When the warm red drops touched her hand, she froze. Later, she would tell her attendants that her skin seemed to glow afterward, that she felt younger, smoother. Whether it was vanity, madness, or imagination, that moment lit a fire in her mind. The belief that blood could preserve beauty. Soon, the castle staff began to vanish. Young servant girls, mostly. They were said to have run away or been sent to other estates. But villagers whispered that something darker was happening behind the castle walls, at night. Torches flickered in upper windows. Screams were heard, but quickly silenced. And Elizabeth Bathory's skin, they said, never seemed to age. She started to keep mirrors in every room. She demanded that no servant look her directly in the eye. Her vanity had become ritual. Every morning, she would stare at her reflection for hours, searching for even the faintest wrinkle. The castle priest noticed her absences from church. When he came to visit, he found the halls colder than ever, the servants pale and trembling. He asked where the missing girls had gone. Elizabeth smiled and said softly, "They were unworthy." As the priest left, he saw a stain on the floor near the kitchen. Dark, sticky. He prayed it was wine outside. The villagers had stopped sending their daughters to work at the castle. Rumors spread like wildfire that the Countess was practicing witchcraft, that she bathed in blood to keep herself young. But who would dare accuse a Bathory? Her family's power reached all the way to the king's court. Still, the fear grew. And the screams continued. Imagine standing in that castle tonight. The torches flicker. The air smells of iron and candle wax. You walk past mirrors covered in silk, each one hiding something unspeakable. And somewhere, in a locked chamber, the Countess whispers a prayer to her own reflection. She believes she has found eternity. But what she has truly found is damnation. Winter deepened around Seagit Castle. The forests were silent, buried beneath snow. Only the faint light of torches burned against the stone. Inside, Elizabeth Bathory walked the corridors alone. Her husband was gone again, fighting in distant wars. She ruled not with kindness, but with fear. The servants obeyed every whisper of her voice. They feared the sudden rage that lived behind her calm eyes. They feared the sound of her footsteps in the dark. Each morning, she examined her reflection. Every wrinkle, every shadow beneath her eyes, filled her with dread. She would touch her skin as if time itself could be wiped away. The memory of that first drop of blood never left her. It had been like a spark in her veins. Now she wanted that spark again. She began to experiment. At first, it was small cuts on the arms of servants, drops of blood mixed with herbs. Then came larger wounds, and whispered prayers to old gods no priest dared name in Seagit Castle. Beauty had become a religion, and Elizabeth was its high priestess. She called her closest attendants the faithful, women who shared her secret, who prepared the rooms, fetched the girls, cleaned the stains. They spoke little, and when they did, it was in hushed tones filled with terror. Late at night, the castle's upper chamber filled with candlelight. The air was heavy with perfume and iron. A girl would be led inside, trembling, believing she was being tested for service. Elizabeth would approach her slowly. She would touch her face, compliment her skin. Then she would whisper, "You are perfect." What followed became the subject of endless rumor. Some said she drained their blood with needles. Others claimed she slit their wrists herself. But no one truly knew, only that the girls were never seen again. When morning came, Elizabeth appeared radiant. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright. Servants whispered that she looked 10 years younger. Word reached her husband. When he returned, he confronted her. He found the castle staff silent, the halls too clean, too still. He questioned her, and she smiled. "Ferenc," she said softly, "you fight wars for glory. I fight time." He said nothing more. But after that day, he never asked again. Over the years, her obsession grew with every mirror, every candlelit night. She began to record her own mixtures, oils, the temperature of the blood, even the moon's position. It was no longer rage. It was science twisted into superstition. Outside the castle, winter turned to spring. Peasants tilled the soil, unaware of what their noblewoman was becoming. But the village priest noticed something strange: funerals without bodies. Families wept for daughters who had vanished. When he visited the castle again, the Countess greeted him in silk and gold. Her beauty was breathtaking. Too perfect. Too cold. He warned her that God saw everything. She smiled and said, "Then he must admire perfection." The priest left trembling. In his diary, he wrote, "There is no warmth in her eyes. Only ice and vanity. The devil sits in her heart." At night, lightning cracked across the mountains. Thunder rolled like drums of judgment. Inside, Elizabeth watched the storm from her window. Her reflection doubled in the glass dot. She whispered to herself, "Even the heavens envy youth." But storms bring truth with them. One evening, a girl escaped. Her hands were bloody, her face pale with terror. She ran through the forest until she reached a farmhouse, screaming of horrors inside the castle. The villagers gathered with torches. They marched to the gates, shouting her name, demanding answers. But the guards turned them away, and the Countess ordered silence. Still, rumors spread faster than soldiers could suppress them. The Blood Countess, they called her now. Some believed she was immortal. Others whispered that she had made a pact with the devil himself. In the royal court of Hungary, nobles began to murmur. Could one of their own truly have done such things? Could a Bathory bring shame upon her bloodline? Yet even then, power protected her. No one dared investigate. No one wanted to. As long as she remained quiet, as long as the peasants feared her, the silence would hold. But silence never lasts. Every ritual leaves a mark on the walls, on the earth, on the soul. And in Sejeet Castle, those marks were growing. The smell of blood clung to the stones. The faithful whispered that the Countess no longer slept, that she spoke to her reflection at night as if it answered her back. Sometimes they heard laughter. Sometimes they heard weeping. And then came the dream that haunted her. In the dream, she stood in front of a mirror, but her reflection was gone. Only the blood on her hands remained. When she awoke, she felt the first wrinkle on her skin. She screamed until dawn. That morning, she ordered 10 new girls brought to the castle. She said she needed more servants. But everyone knew the truth. Elizabeth Bathory had crossed the line between vanity and madness. Now, she believed she was fighting death itself, and death was beginning to notice. Summer came to the hills of Hungary. The snow melted, revealing the green beneath. But in Szeged Castle, the air stayed cold. Elizabeth Bathory no longer saw seasons. Her windows were shuttered, her curtains drawn. The outside world had become irrelevant. She lived by candlelight and fear. Every shadow became a mirror, every reflection a test of whether she still looked young. The faithful worked in silence. They prepared the rooms, scrubbed the stains, burned the sheets. Some had been with her for years, bound by terror more than loyalty. Among them was Anna Darvulia, her closest confidant. A midwife by trade, she had a knowledge of herbs and poisons. Some say Anna fed Elizabeth's madness, whispering that blood from the pure holds the strongest power. Others believe she tried to stop her and failed. Either way, the two women became inseparable. Together, they perfected the ritual. Warm baths infused with herbs, then mixed with the blood of the young. Elizabeth swore she could feel life returning to her veins. Her skin glowed under candlelight. Her eyes sparkled again. To her, it was proof that God himself had chosen her to defy decay. But outside the castle, the world was changing. The wars had ended. Her husband, Count Ferenc Nadasti, returned one last time. He was sick-wounded, weary, and silent. When he looked at his wife, he saw something he could not name. Her beauty was untouched, but her eyes were hollow. He stayed only a few weeks before dying in his sleep dot at his funeral. Elizabeth did not weep. She stood in black silk, her skin flawless, her face still young. Villagers whispered that she looked as she had on her wedding day. But grief has its own hunger. With her husband gone, her cruelty grew unchecked. Now there was no one to question her, no one to protect the girls. She began to recruit more servants, young peasant girls, lured by promises of work. Some were taken from nearby villages. Others were kidnapped outright. The castle became a maze of fear. Screams echoed through the night, muffled by thick stone walls. Those who survived even a day never spoke again. Some said she bit her victims. Others claimed she used needles, knives, even branding irons. Yet every morning the Countess appeared radiant. She walked through her halls with poise, her hair shining in the light. She greeted guests as if nothing was wrong. When questioned about the missing girls, she would laugh softly and say, "Peasants run away. They always do." But one man did not believe her. His name was Istvan Magari, a Lutheran minister from a nearby town. He began collecting testimonies from families, from servants, from anyone who had seen or heard something. And what he found terrified him. He wrote letters to the Hungarian court, warning that Szeged Castle had become a house of murder. For years, no one listened. The Bathory name was too powerful, too noble to question. But as the number of missing girls grew, even the king could no longer ignore the whispers. Elizabeth, meanwhile, grew careless. Her rituals became more frequent, more violent. The faithful were exhausted, trembling, afraid to speak her name aloud. Some began to hide evidence-burned clothes, discarded tools fearing what would come next. And came the night that broke the silence. A noblewoman visiting the castle arrived unannounced. She heard screams coming from the upper chambers. When she pushed open a door, she saw what no one was meant to see. The girl on the floor was still alive, her skin pale, her eyes wide with terror. And beside her stood the Countess, her gown stained, her face expressionless. For a moment their eyes met. Then Elizabeth whispered, "You shouldn't have seen this." The noblewoman fled. By dawn, the story had reached Vienna. Now the crown could no longer protect her. A royal investigator was appointed György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary. He had known Elizabeth for years. She was a Bathory, a noble, almost untouchable. But the king ordered him to find the truth. Elizabeth received word of the coming inspection. She smiled and said, "Let them come. They will find nothing." But even she could not silence the castle's ghosts. That night, her reflection began to change. She looked into the mirror and saw herself as she truly was, eyes dark, lips cold, skin no longer flawless, but cracked like porcelain. She struck the mirror with her hand. It shattered, splintering her face into 100 fragments. Blood ran down her fingers. This time, she did not feel younger. She only felt fear. Outside, thunder rolled again over the Carpathians, and the footsteps of the royal guards drew closer. Inside Szeged Castle, the Blood Countess prepared for judgment. Snow fell again over the Carpathian hills. The castle stood silent, its towers cutting through the white sky like black knives. Inside, Elizabeth Bathory waited. She had heard the news. The Palatine, György Thurzo, was coming, and with him the king's seal. For years she had silenced every rumor, every whisper, every scream. But power cannot hide forever, not when blood leaves traces even stone cannot forget. Thurzo rode with a dozen men, their torches flickering in the cold. They had orders to investigate, but also to proceed with caution. After all, this was not a peasant's home, it was a Bathory fortress, a place of nobility, of history, of fear. As they approached, the wind howled through the gates. The smell of smoke and something else iron maybe hung in the air. The guards at the door looked pale. They did not move. Thurzo dismounted and walked forward. His boots echoed across the courtyard. He knocked once, firmly. The door opened. Elizabeth Bathory stood there, composed, draped in black silk. Her hair gleamed like polished obsidian. She smiled. "Welcome to Szeged Castle," she said. "Forgive the mess. Winter is cruel to old homes." Her voice was calm. Her eyes were not. Thurzo bowed slightly. "By the order of His Majesty, we are to investigate certain claims." Her smile never wavered. "Claims," she repeated. "How amusing." She led them through the grand hall. The torches flickered, casting shadows across portraits of her ancestors' men and women who had ruled, conquered, and punished. Each face seemed to watch as the investigators passed. The first chamber was immaculate. So was the second. But when they reached the upper corridor, the air changed. It was heavy, metallic. A door stood half open. Thurzo pushed it. Inside, the smell hit them thick and unmistakable. Blood. The floor was stained dark. The walls were splattered. And in the corner lay a girl, her body still warm. Thurzo's men froze. One of them whispered a prayer. Another turned away. Pale as chalk. Elizabeth stood behind them, silent. Her eyes were fixed on the girl's face. When Thurzo turned, he saw something strange. No remorse, no fear, only irritation. He said quietly, "My lady, "What have you done?" She answered, "Justice for those who failed me." Thurzo ordered the castle searched. Room after room. They found Mordaunt in the cellar. They discovered chains, buckets, and cloths soaked in blood. In a locked chest letters, lists of names, and vials of strange powders. In the courtyard well bones, the faithful were captured, trembling, praying for mercy. They confessed under oath. Anna Darvulia had died months before, they said, but the Countess continued alone. One servant whispered that she had killed over 600 girls. Another swore he had helped bury at least 50 when Thurzo confronted. Her again, she stood by the window, staring at the snow. He said, "You will answer for this." She replied, "Answer to whom? To peasants? To men who fear time as I do?" Thurzo stepped closer. "You have defied God and king alike." Elizabeth turned, her eyes burning. "I have defied death," she said. Outside, the guards prepared carriages for transport. But when Thurzo returned to the hall, she was gone. They found her in her private chamber, sitting before a mirror. It was shattered. Her hands were cut, bleeding. She whispered to her reflection, "They cannot take eternity from me." Thurzo ordered her arrested. She did not resist. As they led her through the corridors, servants hid their faces. The castle that had once trembled at her command now watched her fall. Snow fell harder, covering the blood that stained the stones. Sigit Castle exhaled like a beast finally freed from its master dot. In the days that followed, the investigation uncovered horrors beyond imagination. Witnesses described screams echoing for hours, girls hung from hooks, strange baths prepared under moonlight. But none of it made sense, because no one could believe one woman, even a Bathory, could do all this. The king ordered her trial, but Thurzo hesitated. To expose her crimes fully would stain the entire nobility. So he chose a different path. He condemned her without a trial. Her accomplices would hang. She would not. Instead, she would be sealed inside her own castle alive, but entombed. When she heard the verdict, Elizabeth Bathory smiled for the last time. "They cannot bury me," she said softly. "I have already become legend." The judgment was swift. No defense. No mercy. Elizabeth Bathory, once the most powerful woman in Hungary, was now a prisoner inside her own fortress. Sigit Castle, her empire of mirrors and whispers, became her tomb. Thurzo ordered the masons to seal her chamber. They built thick stone walls across the doorway, leaving only a small slit for food and air. From that moment, her world shrank to a single room, cold, silent, endless, no mirrors, no candles, no servants, only her reflection in the dark glass of memory. For the first days, she screamed. She shouted curses that echoed through the halls, calling on every saint and demon she knew. But the walls did not answer. Then she fell silent, and the castle forgot her voice. Outside, her name was erased from the records. Her estates were seized. Her accomplices executed, one by hanging, one by fire, one by breaking wheel. Their screams replaced the silence she had left behind, yet the legend did not die. Even as the king ordered her memory destroyed, stories spread faster than the decree. Villagers whispered that, on stormy nights, her laughter could still be heard, that the snow around her tower never melted, that the air smelled faintly of iron. Inside her chamber, she kept count of the days by scratching the wall. At first, The marks were neat lines. Then they grew uneven, desperate, overlapping. The stone itself began to crumble beneath her nails. She spoke to the slit in the wall as if someone were listening. Sometimes she prayed. Sometimes she pleaded. But most often she whispered to herself. "You wanted eternity," she said. "You have it." As the years passed, her beauty faded. Her hair turned white. Her skin, once pale and perfect, grew thin and gray. But her eyes remained sharp burning with the same hunger that had doomed her. The guards said she still demanded wine instead of water, that she asked for a mirror again and again. None were given. One night, during a storm, a young guard claimed he heard her voice. Soft, calm, she was singing. The melody drifted through the crack in the wall like a ghost. He never forgot it. When morning came, the food left in the slit remained untouched. No sound came from inside. The guard called for his captain. They broke through the wall. The room smelled of dust and candle wax long burned out. Elizabeth Bathory sat upright in her chair, her head tilted slightly toward the light. Her eyes were open. She looked almost peaceful. A faint smile rested on her lips, as if she had just seen her reflection one last time. They buried her without ceremony. No priest, no prayer. The Bathory name, once carved in marble, was now a curse. But death did not end her story. In the decades that followed, travelers spoke of strange lights flickering in the castle at night. Poets wrote of a woman whose beauty defied time. And historians argued whether she was a murderer or a victim of power, envy, and myth. Some said her crimes were exaggerated, twisted by political rivals who sought her fortune. Others swore that the evidence was undeniable. But the truth, buried beneath stone and rumor, never fully surfaced. Even today, her castle stands in ruins. The walls, once gleaming with silk and candlelight, are cold and cracked. Wind moves through them like a whisper. If you stand there at dusk, you might hear it too. A soft voice, faint, almost human. "Mirror," it says. "Bring me the mirror." And for a moment, you can almost imagine her still there, the woman who tried to stop time and became its prisoner instead. Death silenced her voice. But it did not silence her story. In the villages below Seajeet Castle, people spoke her name in whispers. They no longer called her Lady Bathory. They called her something else, something darker. The Blood Countess. Children were warned not to wander too close to the ruins. Mothers told them, "She still walks when the moon is red." Fathers crossed themselves when lightning struck the castle's tower. It became more than history. It became folklore. Priests said she was damned. Scholars said she was framed. Poets said she was immortal. The truth lay somewhere in between, buried beneath centuries of fear and fascination. In the early 1600s, her name appeared in court documents, faded ink on brittle parchment. Some records described bodies, torture, blood. Others only hinted, using words like sin, vanity, and unholy practice. No two accounts ever matched. One scribe wrote that 600 girls had died by her hand. Another claimed the number was a lie and invention to justify her arrest. Because even after death, power still protected her. The Bathory family erased, edited, concealed. Historians found letters years later, some signed by Elizabeth herself. Her handwriting elegant, deliberate. She wrote of loneliness, of decay, of betrayal. Nowhere did she confess. "Time will tell the truth," she wrote once. It always does. But time does not tell the truth. It chooses the story people want to hear. And people wanted to hear of monsters in the centuries that followed. Her legend grew teeth. Writers called her the female Dracula. Painters imagined her bathing in crimson pools. Some claimed she drank blood from silver goblets. Others that she slept in coffins lined with rose petals. Thus the line between woman and myth vanished. The more history tried to explain her, the darker she became. In 1729, the first printed account of her crimes appeared in Vienna. It described her as a vampire who had sold her soul for beauty. That book spread across Europe, turning Elizabeth Bathory from a forgotten noblewoman into a symbol of forbidden desire and power. By the 1800s, artists painted her as a goddess of death. By the 1900s, films and novels made her immortal again. Each retelling changed her, refined her, twisted her, glorified her. In the public imagination, she was not human anymore. She was the embodiment of fear of aging, of vanity, of what happens when power meets obsession. But behind the myth, something fragile remained. A real woman, raised in privilege, trapped in expectation, consumed by her reflection. Some modern scholars argue she was a victim of politics, a Protestant noblewoman targeted by Catholic rivals. Her trial, they say, was less about murder and more about confiscating her lands. Others disagree. They point to the testimonies, the evidence, the sheer number of missing girls. They say no politics could invent that much suffering. And so, the argument continues. 400 years later, no one agrees who Elizabeth Bathory truly was. A monster? A myth? A mirror of human obsession? Perhaps she was all three. Today, the ruins of Sighet Castle still stand. Grass grows between its stones. The wind moves through the empty halls, carrying faint echoes of laughter or screams. Tourists visit, snapping photographs, searching for ghosts. Some claim they feel watched. Some say their cameras malfunction near her old chamber. And some, standing at sunset, swear they see her silhouette in the tower window. A woman in black, gazing into a mirror that no longer exists. Maybe it's only imagination. Maybe it's history reminding us that stories never die. They only change shape. Time moved on. Empires rose and fell. Wars changed borders, languages, kings. But the story of Elizabeth Bathory refused to die. In Europe's dark imagination. She lingered like a shadow behind the candle flame, a figure both feared and desired. Writers began to resurrect her in words. They called her Elizabeth, la Comtesse Sanglante, the Bloody Lady of Sighet. Each language gave her a new face, a new sin, a new purpose. By the 18th century, science was replacing superstition. Yet Bathory's story lived where reason could not reach. In the secret heart of fear, the people of that age feared two things: death and decay. And Bathory was the perfect ghost to haunt both. Pamphlets sold in Vienna told lurid tales of her beauty rituals. Actors performed her trial in shadowed theaters. Audiences gasped, horrified, thrilled. They whispered afterward that perhaps she had never died, that she wandered still, feeding not on blood, but on fascination. In 1817, a French writer compared her to the new Gothic creatures of fiction, to vampires, succubi, and cursed queens. And when Bram Stoker created Count Dracula decades later, some said the Countess was his silent muse, But Bathory was not like the vampires of men's stories. She was not a creature seeking victims. She was a mirror reflecting their own fear of women's power. Victorian society needed monsters. It found one in her. She became the symbol of vanity, lust, and the punishment for desire. Painters showed her with pale skin and crimson gowns, bathed in the light of candles shaped like teardrops. They turned her cruelty into art. The world began to romanticize what it should have condemned. The legend of the Blood Countess became a strange mixture of horror and seduction, not in the salons of Paris. Men spoke her name as if it were poetry. In Budapest, ghost stories painted her as a cursed saint. Even in London, the newspapers called her the mother of monsters. But beneath every retelling, one truth remained. She had become immortal, not through blood, but through storytelling. Her image changed with each century. To some, she was a warning about obsession. To others, she was empowerment itself, a woman who refused to age, to obey, to fade quietly. Modern historians began to ask different questions. Was she a villain or a myth created to punish a powerful woman? Because history rarely allows powerful women to die peacefully. It rewrites them into warnings. And so, Elizabeth Bathory joined the pantheon of the damned. Not as a ghost in her castle, but as an idea that outlived her bones. Every generation found a new version of her. Painters, novelists, filmmakers, all chasing the same impossible reflection. In each, she looked back at them and whispered, "You cannot destroy me. I am what you fear." 4 centuries have passed. The stones of Seageat Castle are cracked and broken. The banners are gone. The mirrors have turned to dust. But her name remains. Elizabeth Bathory lives on, not in flesh, but in fascination. Her face appears on book covers, her story retold in whispers and screens. Every generation rebuilds her castle in imagination. Some say she was evil. Some say she was a victim. Most cannot look away because she embodies something deeper, our obsession with beauty, power, and punishment. We live in an age that worships youth just as she once did. Screens replace mirrors. Followers replace servants. And still, people bleed for beauty only now by choice. The Blood Countess is no longer a horror story. She's a reflection of the same hunger that drives modern perfection. Her legend asks an uncomfortable question. If vanity is a sin, why do we build entire worlds around it? Historians dig for evidence, scientists test her myths, and filmmakers reimagine her face. Yet no one finds closure. Because every retelling brings her back to life. In Slovakia, tourists climb the ruins of her castle. They leave flowers, coins, even mirrors. Some claim the air feels heavier there, as if centuries of whispers still linger between the stones. At sunset, the ruins glow gold for a moment, the same color as the candlelight that once lit her chamber. Wind moves through the cracks, and for a heartbeat, it sounds like breathing. They say if you stand there long enough, you might hear the faint echo of silk rustling, or a soft voice calling from the dark, not for blood, not for forgiveness, but for reflection. Because in the end, her story is not about death. It's about the mirror we hold to ourselves. Elizabeth Bathory never escaped time. None of us do. But she learned something the rest of the world is still afraid to face. That beauty without mercy becomes its own kind of curse. And so her legend endures. Not in fear, not in hate, but in fascination. The world moves on. The castles crumble. But somewhere, in a candlelit nunnery, the Blood Countess still looks into her mirror and sees us looking back.